Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 26th of May 2021, coming to you from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7ERP. Good to see you. On tonight's show, it's a Morse special from the Samuel Morse Amateur Radio Club live from Sacramento. We have a Spring View update, some late entries from last week's Bonanza. And we find out who works from a shack like this. We've had a few entries, but if you think you know at the last moment, then please let us know. The only clue I'll give you, there was a couple of clues on the newsletter, but the only clues I'm going to give you now is, does it register with any of you now? But first, I'm afraid I have to start with bad news, because this morning the club lost a dear member. Philip G4NZQ is now silent key. Many of you I know will know Philip. You'll have certainly heard him on the air for many years, and he has been a long-term member of the club. But he's also been very much a part of the Radio Society of Great Britain for many years too. He's a very active member, as I said, of the RSGB, who's a member of the board and was the Region 12 manager, our manager here in Norfolk, for many years too. He's been battling with cancer for many years, but he passed away this morning at home with his wife, Beryl, by his side. He was the GB2RS news reader for Norfolk for many, many years, and in fact for more years than I or any of my colleagues can count, and was very often seen on the RSGB bookstall at our annual Barford Radio Rally. You can see him here, very often seen there for many, many years. Norfolk Amateur Radio Club and the Radio Society of Great Britain have lost a man really dedicated to the hobby. And if I may, I would say he's one of life's real gentlemen in every sense of the word. If you'd like details of Phil's funeral, let me know with an email and I'll let you know as soon as I know. Philip Brooks, G4NZQ, sadly silent key this morning. Now, some extra items from last week's Spring View. And Paul, AM1AFQ, if you saw last week, you'll know that he was talking about a bird, a song thrush, that would come into his house, through the window into his house. He told us all about it, and I asked him to send us pictures. And this he's done. Have a look at these.
Lovely little thing, isn't it?
He is. But if you remember what Paul said when he came on the Zoom call, because it was an interactive last week, he said that this bird not only knocked on the window, but came through.
Came in, didn't it?
He did.
Yeah.
And now he's very much part of the family, I guess. He came and sat on the sofa and everything, and don't worry. So a lovely bird, lovely visitor that Paul's got. Thank you for sending us those pictures, Paul. And also Mike G8EY, who didn't have any pictures to send us before, sent us this picture. And he said, typical. The first time I've been able to catch this trio. Apparently they visit Morrison's in Old Catton for breakfast and tea from the All Sorts hardware shop, who have approved duck feed available for them. Every day, I think. Luckily they turned up for tea a little early, possibly due to the weather, so he snapped this lovely picture. And by the way, if you didn't see last week's Spring View, it really was a wonderful collection of pictures and videos from many, many members. It's about an hour and a half, the programme, and you can catch it on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. You can watch the whole programme again. There's some really stunning photography and videos, and once again from Tammy and me, thank you ever so much to everybody who sent things for that. In fact, I believe this week a large broadcasting corporation based in Britain have started their own thing called Springwatch.
Oh.
And guess where it comes from?
Well, I think there might be some of that coming from Norfolk.
I think it might
So
be.
we've obviously got some good wildlife here.
Do you think they copied us, or we kind of inspired by them? Anyway, Springwatch is coming indeed from Norfolk. If you enjoyed the pictures last week, the Beaver put a lot of resources that's coming from North Norfolk, a lot of it. So I'm sure you'll enjoy that as well. And finally, from your news this week, Bob G6PWS sent us this picture, and it's simply called Emergency Garden Support. Well, hopefully if we've got the weather forecast right,
Yeah,
which
get
I'm sure we
out
have
there
been
this
here.
weekend.
Exactly, it's going to get a bit warmer.
Yeah.
So
Looking
maybe you've
good.
got a garden a bit like that. A lovely thing to have in your garden, a little
Yeah.
bar art like that. Brilliant. Thank you, Bob, for sending us that. Don't forget to send us your pictures and stories and everything. It really makes a difference, and we love to show them at this part of the programme. Send them to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. Thank you. Tammy, Little People every week.
Yep.
You surprise us. I have not seen this one. I haven't even seen this one on a tiny little preview screen that I normally do. So here we are. So this is going to be as much a surprise to me as to everybody
here's
at
Little
home.
People. So this one's called a sound train.
Oh, cool. So that's like one of those old Ghetto Blasters stroke radio cassettes.
Yep. I reckon that's a bit bigger than 00 though, don't you? I reckon that's O gauge.
Well, the track, though,
Yeah.
looks a bit 00, doesn't it?
No, I think it's O.
Do you?
It? Well, with that size of Ghetto Blaster on it.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, the
Anyway,
size
we're
of
getting a little bit too technical.
We
here.
are getting, yeah. Well, I know how you love railways, Tammy. You just
No.
try to hide it. Anyway, look at that. It's a
I thought that
brilliant
was quite
use
cool,
and
that one.
ingenuity, because you just have to look at it twice to realise what it's made up of.
A little bit of retro as well in there.
Yeah, with the cassettes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had to tell you what you use a pencil for with a cassette, didn't I?
No, I can remember cassette
Oh, can you?
tapes. Yeah.
Can you remember the pencil, what you used that for?
Well, I used to stick my finger in it and swirl it round.
Okay.
Yeah.
Only people of a certain age, I reckon. Anyway, if you like this picture, there's plenty more. Every day they publish a new one, and there's the address at the bottom of your screen to have a look. miniature-calendar.com. Every day there's a new one. But Tammy will choose one for us every week as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tammy. So as I said, keep in touch with what you're doing. Send us any pictures, stories. It doesn't have to be radio related, and we'll share them with everybody else. Now, that competition that I've been saying for ages is coming to an end. As far as I know, this is the penultimate picture of the quiz
This is
this
60.
week.
Today
Is it
60.
really?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the 60th shack
Yep.
we've shown you. There'll be another one tonight and another one next week, but that's it. So this is a real final warning now.
You've been saying this for the
I
last
have
10
Christmas.
weeks or something.
Christmas I started saying
Christmas,
it.
was it?
But if you haven't sent your picture in yet, you need to, because then we're going to start a brand new competition after this. All right, and we won't be going backwards to it. So anyway, let's have a look at last week's shack. Who do you think worked from a shack like this? There we are. There's some clues there, and I gave some clues on there. Have we had any guesses
I don't
online?
think we have actually had any guesses online tonight, no.
Okay.
People are saying they love the new opening graphics.
Oh, good.
Excellent.
That's good. Yeah, I thought they'd noticed that.
Yep.
Well done, Tammy. Most of that was your work. I just approved it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well done. If you did like that, let us know. Anyway, this is about the shack. Do you know who works from a shack like this? We've had some guesses. Roy G3ZIG sent us an email and said, "Hi, is it my old friend Reg G8AUN?"
Colin M0GMK, thanks for the clue. Is it Reg G8AUN?
And Chris G4CCX says, "Well, going by your clue," we maybe gave him too many clues. Anyway, and the FT897, I will guess it's the shack of Reg G8AUN.
John G8VPE, I think this week's Mystery Shack belongs to Reg G8AUN. Great aunt indeed. What a clue. Ho, ho, ho. If you compare the photo on NARC News with the photo on Reg's QRZ page, they look remarkably similar.
So, Tammy, reveal all. I think
Well,
we've
I
had
think we
enough.
might know whose it is. It is Reg G8AUN.
Well done. Thank you for sharing that, Reg. We've got two more left, actually. That's it, haven't we? So let's see who's going to be for this week. Who works from a shack like this?
Got a double picture this week, so we've got a double-sided room. So.
Yeah, look at that. A lot of equipment, very neat and tidy. Do you know who that is? There is a couple of good clues there. One in particular, I think, but I think, because it's easy when you know, but there's a couple of really good clues there, if you're good at clues. I'm not going to help you at the moment. We'll see what you think. Again, a well-known club member. Let us know who you think that shack is. This will be posted on our Facebook page and also on the club's newsletter this weekend. But if you think you know now, why not send us an email now?
Yep.
Just send it to the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. Send it by 3 o'clock next Wednesday at the very latest, and you can enter this competition We're almost at the end. That's the penultimate shack.
At the moment.
At the moment, unless you know different. If you know different and you'd like to send us a picture of your shack, please do it right away.
Right away.
Just time now, before we get onto our main event tonight, to tell you what's happening at the club next week. On Sunday, of course, we have the GB2RS News at 7 o'clock with Mike, G4DYC. On Monday, the 31st of May, the Monday Night Net. And this week, the subject is AI, or artificial intelligence, how it affects us now and how might it affect us in the future. That's on repeater GB3NB at 7:30 on Monday, hosted by Steve G3EVA. At 8:30 on Monday is the 80-metre CW Net. And next Wednesday, here, 7:30 on the 2nd of June. We're into June, can you believe that? It's a talk about de-expeditioning from Bob K4UEE and features a video all about the FT5ZM de-expedition to Amsterdam Island. So it's a good way to find out about de-expeditions, how they're funded, what you could do to go on one, and we're going to see a real live de-expedition as well. Plus all the regulars, your shack, of course, whose shack as well, and your own pictures and stories. Don't forget to let us know. And if you want to know more about our club, if you just found this and wondering what it's all about, well, we're Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, and you can find out more on our website at www.norfolkamateurradio.org. And as I always say at this time as well, we have a special card which we've produced in these difficult times, which we can send to people for a birthday, a celebration, an anniversary, or maybe just someone's not feeling very well at the moment. We will send this card to anybody at all. They don't have to be radio amateurs or anything to do with our club. We'll sign it on behalf of you and also ourselves, and we'll send it off to anywhere in the world at all. So just drop us a line to that usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com, with who you'd like us to send that to, and we're very happy to do it. So now we come on to tonight's main event, and I have to tell you how we started it, how this was started really. As you know, Roger D3LEI, who's the club's programme secretary, books around half the talk. So he books it roughly every other Wednesday, and Tammy and I book the other ones. And of course, normally, Roger, as you know, is a very keen advocate of Morse. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Ken M0KJW sent us a news item and told us about a special bug roundup, a special weekend of bug operating with the Samuel F. Morse Amateur Radio Club in Sacramento. So we carried that as a news item. And then we got thinking, you know what, we always rely on Roger or Malcolm or Jim to do something on Morse for the club. Why don't we set something up for them so they can sit back, have a glass of something they fancy and relax with it. So we've got surely one of the best representatives of this part of the hobby we could possibly have, because we've got the president of the Samuel F. Morse Amateur Radio Club in Sacramento, Mike N6MQL, and he's with us now. Mike.
Well, hello.
Good evening from us, and I guess it's good afternoon, or is it? Oh no, just late morning for you.
Yep, just about noontime here now. And thank you very much, Tammy and Dave, for inviting me to your show. Do appreciate the offer and the welcome.
Yeah, well, it's really good to see you. Before, I know you're going to tell us a little bit about the history of Morse and lots of other useful things, in particular focus about bugs, but you just had this special weekend. Maybe if it's not spoiling your presentation or something, you could just tell us how you did, how it was going, how it went.
Well, as many of us know, the band conditions still aren't quite there yet. We're looking for a little bit more sunspot, but we haven't quite gotten there yet, even though they told us we were heading up in the new solar cycle. So we didn't have quite as good communications as we've had in the past, but nonetheless, we still had plenty of stations on the air that were making contacts both here in the United States, South America, down under, and then across the pond in your direction. As a matter of fact, we have a few logs that were turned in from the European nations, and we enjoyed seeing contacts that were being made, some of which we never heard or even knew were going on at the time. Myself, I've worked probably about 20 stations, operated probably about 8 hours out of the 48 hours, and enjoyed some really good communications with the East Coast and and New Zealand, as well as Japan.
Excellent. Well, I know you're going to visit that later on in your presentation. So I'm now going to hand over to you anyway. We're really looking forward to this presentation. And for those of you at home, if you've got questions or comments or anything to make to Mike, you can either ask them during his talk or straight afterwards. But now let's go back to Mike and find out all about Morse.
Well, Morse code, as you know, was originally said to be invented by Samuel F. Morse, and that's the reason we ended up calling this club Samuel F. Morse Amateur Radio Club. But as a matter of fact, Samuel F. Morse had designed the Morse code as a paper ticker tape type of sending and receiving. And it wasn't until his assistant, Vail, actually designed the Morse code key in order to send this information through the radio lines or telegraph, and then it exploded into a new language. The early adoption of it was using over the telegraph, as I mentioned, and nothing more than a sounder that was heard by the operators in order to decode the code that was coming through. The original Morse code is a little different than the Morse code that we use today. The original Morse code was American Morse code. And then later on in a conference that happened, I believe it was in Paris, a German operator decided to rewrite the code so that it would be a little more international. So they did call it the International Morse code. And even the states, as hard as it is to believe, they went ahead and relinquished the American Morse code and changed that into the International Morse code. And the difference being that some of the characters were a little longer to create the same letters. The interesting thing about that is the Morse code that was originally designed, the American Morse code, it's actually not legal to send that on the air as regular communications. So we're indicated by the FCC in the United States that we are to use the International Morse code. So I thought that was very interesting that they actually abandoned that. As you know, we've tried to learn the metric system here all the way back to when I was in grade school, and we just never got it. So as Americans do, we just tossed it aside and went back to our feet and inches and into our imperial system. So Morse code later went on to the on air through Marconi's invention, and some would dispute that as well. They would say that there's a Russian engineer who designed the first radio. But as we know it, it's Marconi, and he created the first wireless system. And that first wireless system was spark gap, and it actually had noise from a spark that was transmitted over the air. And then every time you would key your telegraph, it would interrupt the spark. So as opposed to what we hear now, which is a carrier that's sent on an offset tone, in the old days, we used to have noise on the radio, and then it would be interrupted with silence. So that's actually an interesting concept of sending Morse code. If you could imagine there were a lot of operators on the air, what it would sound like with everybody sending a spark gap signal and interrupting it would probably be extremely difficult to copy more than one or two stations on a certain band at a time. So that was the history of Morse code, from the telegraph to the spark gap, and now to what we use, the offset carrier, in order to hear a tone for Morse code. As a child, I actually learned Morse code out of a book, which is, I can say now as a CW teacher, completely the wrong way to learn Morse code. Morse code is a audible code. We use it, we hear it, and we never see it. So as a child, I went to the library and I found this book in the library, and I wanted to learn code because I had previous history as a CB radio operator, starting, believe it or not, when I was 5 years old. I was always interested in electronics and radio communications. Nobody in my family was actually a amateur radio operator or a CB radio operator, so I had no history from that. Somehow I just grabbed a hold of it and I started meeting people. By the time I was about 9 years old, I was already working on amplifiers and fixing electronic equipment. But learning Morse code through the book, I was able to memorize all of the dots and dashes. And then once I went over to my local amateur radio club, which was actually the Lockheed Employees Radio Club, they were teaching a novice course. So I took their novice course. And then when I went to take my beginning novice exam for the 5-word per minute code portion, I actually heard Morse code for the very first time. So that was really crazy to actually hear these dots and dashes coming at me. In hindsight, I wish I'd actually listened to it a little more so that I could hear what the sounds of the code are. And I would have known that instead of a dot dash, it would be did-ah, as we hear it on the air for an A. So learning that code was super difficult. So I don't recommend anybody uses a book to learn Morse code. Certainly not now that we have so many electronic and over the Zoom classes that you can attend. Later on, as I went through this course with the Amateur Radio Lockheed Club, I was brought in as an official member, but of course I was about 13 years old, so I couldn't really be an official member because this was all Lockheed employees, as it's a Lockheed employee amateur radio club, as opposed to just a local club. So I was put in under their wing, and they helped me out to learn Morse code even better and faster. They gave me tips and hints on what I can do. The guys were really helpful. They actually came over to the house and they took down my CB antenna gladly and hooked up a fan inverted V for me for 3 different bands, gave me an amateur radio and a Morse code key, and sent me on my way. Those guys were very adamant about Morse code. They were all World War II veterans. Many of them were radio operators on the front line, and they knew Morse code like the back of their hand. One of the things is they almost never had a microphone. The only microphones that I ever saw with that club or their members, those were all in their cars. They were their 2-meter amateur radios and no HF microphones. Even the club, I can remember being in the club station and there was no microphone to be found. There was a host of keys on the table, and that's about it. So Morse code was really instilled into me by that radio club. And until I was at least 17, I can't say that I ever made a voice communications over HF radio. Later on, one of the members actually hooked me up with his friend who was an operator on the RMS Queen Mary, which is parked in Long Beach, California here. At the time, I was living in Los Angeles. I've since moved to Sacramento. But as a operator in Los Angeles, Long Beach was about a 45-minute drive, and they were kind enough to bring me in on the Saturday shift, and I was able to work W6RO for about 3 or 4 years, if I can remember correctly. I know that as a child, I really didn't want to be waking up early in the morning, but it was such a pleasure and a privilege to be able to work this radio station and do it as one of very few Morse code operators. That was the thing about this radio room. I found that most of the time, all of the other operators were not using Morse code, but they were talking on the VHF, UHF, and the HF radios with voice only. But then later on, when we got in there, we pretty much set up as a Morse code. So Saturdays, if you came by the radio room while we were working our shift from, I believe it was 7 a.m. till 3:30 p.m., if you came by, you wouldn't find a microphone on the table. We would be happy to invite guests in. And of course, on the air, we handed out plenty of QSL cards. That was a big deal. People love the QSL cards. Maybe some of your members here have a W6RO card. It's a great card. It was about, I'd say it was probably about 1 foot long. It was a good size radio card, and you had to send in a self-addressed stamped envelope number 10 in order to receive it back. So that was the W6RO that I operated. Eventually, Disney purchased it, and that's around the time that I had left the W6RO station. Later on, I was really interested in field day operations. I enjoyed getting out with other people. I still wasn't really an active member of any club at the time, because the Amateur Radio Club for Lockheed employees actually was taken down because Lockheed sold the old Burbank buildings that had housed Lockheed, the Lockheed Martin Company. So they moved off to Palmdale, and Palmdale was a bit far away for me, especially as a child who couldn't drive. So Mom wasn't going to drive me for an hour and a half out to the desert to visit their amateur radio station they set up in Palmdale. So that station was taken down, so I was pretty much without a club after that point. So I was visiting another local club for their field day, and I had operated on the air for probably about 20 hours, and we were nearing the end of the event. I had almost 800 contacts I had made by myself. Once again, I found that I was the only operator who used Morse code, and sometime throughout the night, two gentlemen visited me, and after about a half an hour sitting at the same table together as they watched me on the air, I asked them if they wanted to operate too. And one of them said yes, and he operated for about 2 or 3 contacts. The other one, he took about 1 contact, and then they both said they had had enough. But I introduced myself to them, and then they introduced themselves to me, and I realized that I had actually spoken to both of these people on the air, and they both lived local to me. So we were really excited to find out who we were, sitting there for at least a half an hour, not knowing that we all knew each other from the air. So that became a good relationship between the 3 of us. And what ended up happening was, in the morning, our field day event goes until 11:30 in the morning. And around 8 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting right ahead of 800 contacts, and they came in and they told me they were going to shut the operations down. And I asked, well, the field day operations doesn't end until 11:30. Why are we shutting down at 8:15? And they just said they were ready to go. So next thing I know, my antenna is disconnected from the radio. I have no more antenna. I quickly grabbed somebody else's antenna off a radio they hadn't taken down yet. And then I got to about 802 contacts, if I recall correctly. And then no more than 5 minutes later, the power all went off. So here it is about 8:30, 8:45, and I had no more power. And I guess it was time to pack it up. Well, with that frustration of losing hours of field day operations, and the idea that there was so much opportunity to score more points, as some of you may know, in the United States here with our field day operations, Morse code counts as a 2-point factor as opposed to sideband contacts, which only count for 1 point. So I was already at 1,600 points by myself for this club. They had probably generated maybe 80 contacts in voice altogether for the 22 hours of operations that they had. So I felt like I was making a lot of contacts for them, scoring great points, and I was a bit disturbed that they shut me down. The funny thing is, I found out later on, they didn't even turn the logs into the ARRL. So all of that work that I had put in just went for nothing. Well, with that, I went ahead and contacted those 2 gentlemen that I had met at the field day operations for this local club. And I said, why don't you come on over to my Radio Shack and we'll have a talk. So we did, and we discussed that maybe we should have our own field day instead, because we're both or all 3 of us are CW operators. We all love field day, and it just made more sense to split off and do our own thing. So it wasn't official that we would be a radio club at that time, but one of the gentlemen that was there, he jokingly said, yeah, we'll call ourselves the Samuel F. Morse Radio Club. And it got me thinking, that's a great idea. So After they left, I went ahead and started filing paperwork with the FCC and the ARRL to be an affiliated radio club. I even went to the bank and filed for a 501c3 nonprofit registration and also a bank account. I filed with the city of Sacramento to create a business so we could sell merchandise. As a business owner, it was all secondhand to me, so I already knew what I was doing in that department. So I got it all set up, and then the next time we met, I said to him, hey guys, we're actually now the W6SFM Radio Club. W6SFM radio was a actual call that was in use before. It was owned by an author who wrote for QST magazine, 73 magazine, and a lot of the 70s and 80s amateur radio magazines. So he had passed away, and I contacted his son and daughter, and I told them what I was interested in, and they loved the idea. They sent me pictures of all of his old QSL cards and radio information that he had, gave me a great history on their father, and then they approved my using their father's radio call signs for the club. So we became the W6SFM, and from that point on, we started having our own field days, as you see pictured here. This was about 3 years ago when we went to the regular place that we have our field day now. And as you can see here, it's a pretty simple operation. We're just running a KX3 on both tables, each with a 100-watt amplifier. And as you can see, I'm in the picture in front of the computer. It may look like I'm just typing on a computer, but in fact, what's happening here is my left hand is operating a right hand style bug, and I'm typing or getting ready to type with my right hand. So I put the radio behind or next to the computer. I operate with one hand and then type with the other. And that way I can log for myself. Whereas you see on the other station, we have an operator, that's Chris, and he's excellent on the bugs as well. And he's got somebody sitting there with him who's logging on the computer. So there's two different types of operations. You can log for yourself or you could log for others. We have a great time on field day, and currently we have about 70 members, 75 members. We do very well at attracting people from all walks of life. We have members as young as 14 all the way to late 90s, believe it or not. And we get together on air every Tuesday evening on 80 meters, and we have our net. And then, of course, we have our in-person meetings that we hold on the first Thursday of the month. Those are all broadcast live on YouTube and our live page on our website. So www.w6sfm.com. Check it out. Look for the live feed. Whenever we broadcast, it'll be there. And of course, we have plenty of pictures and videos. As a matter of fact, we post the on-air net so people can use them for CW practice, or members can just catch up on the net where they weren't able to hear us, because we have members that are on the East Coast and 80 meters may not work for them at night. So the W6SFM has been around for probably going on 10 years now. I surprised myself the first field day. We had to do it close to my house because my wife was pregnant, and I begged her to please wait to have that baby. And sure enough, she did. My youngest daughter was born 2 days after field day, and I was able to keep it close to the house and enjoy field day, and then go to the birth of my child. Of course, there is a conflict now because every year we always put her birthday right on field day. So Saturday, we usually celebrate on Sunday, and Saturday I'm working all night on field day, and then Sunday morning I don't sleep, so I go all the way through, and then Sunday, of course, I have to go home, set up for her birthday party, and then we celebrate. So I get a good 72 hours of no sleep on field day weekends. One of the things that I did for the club is I created a CW beginners class. You can see here, this is an in-person class. I did do one Zoom class, and I just found it to be extremely difficult. I'm able to hear about 22 different people simultaneously while I'm teaching the class. And if somebody's making mistakes, I can pinpoint who it is, and I can go up to them and I can make corrections, or I can mention it while we're in the class. But we do these classes in person, and Anybody who takes my class, I have not found anyone who did not learn the Morse code. It's like going to the gym. If you go once a week to the gym and you never exercise through the rest of the week, well, at the end of your workouts, say 10 weeks later, which is how long our class is, once a week for 10 consecutive weeks, you're probably not going to be really strong, but you're going to really know how to do those exercises well because you had your personal trainer every week showing you the exercises. That's how Morse code is. If you learn Morse code once a week with an instructor and you go home and do nothing with it, by the end of the course, you'll know Morse code, but you won't be able to use it. Whereas if you do the 10 minutes a day of practice that I ask out of my students, then I can pretty much guarantee that you'll graduate, or I say complete, because there really is no graduation. Everybody works at their own pace. If you complete my course with doing your homework once a day for about 10 minutes, I would say the average person sends between 12 and 15 words per minute code. So we have really great results. My method of teaching is very different than anybody else that I've ever encountered before. And I say that because I don't teach reception. I teach sending. And we always learn on a straight key. It's very important to learn on a straight key because you have to build a foundation for code. If you learn on an iambic keyer, then you're learning nothing more than timing. How long do I hold the left down versus how long do I hold the right side down on the paddle to create a dit or a da, or two dits and two das? So an example of an iambic paddle to send to C, you simply do this. You squeeze, one little squeeze, and you let go. So that's a C, da, 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 let go. On a Morse code key, you have to perform all of that sending by yourself. So you actually have to push down the key, da, dit, da, dit. So while you're sending, you're actually teaching your brain how to send code and how to receive code. The human brain learns from itself by memory muscle. So if you keep sending a C over and over, well, then by golly, you're going to learn a C. And then when somebody sends it back to you, you will be able to receive it. Now, of course, there is a delay in your brain that slows down your receive from your sending ability. And the problem with that, of course, is what I call the 13 word per minute barrier. In the United States, we had different levels of amateur radio that required Morse code before they got rid of the Morse code requirement. They were the novice, 5 words per minute, the general at 13 words per minute, and then the extra that had to operate 20 words per minute. Well, the problem that we found was most people were stuck at that 13 word per minute barrier, and they either couldn't get to the 13 word per minute barrier or they couldn't evolve from 13 to 20 words per minute. And my method, it allows you to get past these barriers. And although the test is not necessary anymore, everybody wants to improve their speed and their reception. One of the things I tell my students, never learn off of one of these apps or a computer, because the way a computer sends is completely different than a human. For example, we'll go back to that C. On a computer or an app on your phone, the C is going to be sent as dot it, dot it, dot it, dot it. A human would never send that way. A human would always send a C that sounds like dot it, dot it, dot it, dot it. So the difference between dot it, and dot it, very different. It's an entirely different language. So if you learn Spanish and you go to Italy, well, you may understand some words, but you're not going to be speaking fluent Italian. So it's always best to learn Morse code properly so that when you hear it, you could decode it. And also when you hear a computer, it makes sense to you as well. So the method of sending instead of doing receiving helps you create your own fist or your personality on Morse code. Everybody has their own personality. Some people send that dot it as dot it. Some people send it differently. And so we can always tell when I'm listening on the air, I know who's sending without having to ask them who they are or hear their call letters. We all have that personality. Well, one of the issues with this 13 word per minute barrier or getting to that 20 words per minute is it stems from the sending. All of the people were taught to learn to receive. Well, if you learned to receive and you received as fast as you could and you kept listening, most often what you would do, because if you were a novice going for the 13 word per minute general, you'd get on the air, which I think is the best thing you can do for Morse code and learning. So when you get on the air and you start calling a CQ at 15 words per minute, what happens? The person is going to answer you at 15 words per minute. Well, of course, you haven't gotten to 15 words per minute, so you immediately slow down to 13 words per minute where you're comfortable sending. And he will return, or she will return to you at 13 words per minute, and you'll have an easier time receiving, but you may be falling apart still, so you'll keep practicing and practicing. The problem is, as I mentioned, the reception of Morse code is always going to lag the sending ability. So if you teach yourself to send 13 words per minute, so you can always send that CQ at 13 words per minute, well, I can assure you that your receive speed is probably going to be between 10 and 11 words per minute, maybe 12 if you're really good at it. So in order to break that 13 word per minute barrier, or any barrier that you're working on. Say you're learning Morse code and you're taking 15 word per minute characters and you're using the Koch method where you put a 9 word per minute break in there. It's important that you keep your fist or your sending at that 15 words per minute so that your brain can acclimate to the sounds of 15 word per minute code. That way, when you hear something at 13 words per minute, the characters sound like something you've heard and you've sent. So it's important for sending more than it is receiving, because you're teaching yourself that memory muscle, and your brain, again, will lag slightly behind that sending. So if you can get yourself up to, say, 15 words per minute sending, you'll reach that 13 words per minute receiving. And the same thing for the 20 words per minute. Most people, they would stop sending at 20 words per minute because it would be too scary to go above it. Well, if they stopped at 20 words per minute, then they're probably stuck at 18 words per minute, 17 words per minute of reception. So if you're learning Morse code, I would recommend to you that you start out by sending. You make your sending incrementally faster, making sure that the characters you're sending are very clear. Because if you're just sending gibberish, well, first off, no one's going to answer your CQ because they won't understand you or want to talk to you, even if they did. And you also want to make sure that you incrementally go slow enough so that your brain can form that memory muscle. So that's breaking the 13 word per minute barrier. Now, what did I do with all these students? Well, all of the students I find that come through the class, they end up joining the club because they love the idea of Morse code so much, and I'm so happy that they do. Not all of them join, but I can say that we have now had 3 past presidents of all of the local clubs as members of the W6SFM, some who never took Morse code class. They just enjoyed Morse code already, and they found that because our club was so specialized, they wanted to be a part of it. And to this day, we still have about 6 members who were the past presidents of the other 3 or 4 local clubs in our area. So with the club, we decided we wanted to give a little bit of outreach to the country, really. We were just looking for not local, but United States local amateur radio operators to get on the air with their bugs. The ARRL does sponsor an event called the Straight Key Night, SKN, SKN. And that's once a year, and it's for a short operating period of time, and it's any straight key. You get on the air and just have conversation. Well, that was good, but most of the operators in our club use bug style keys. If you're not familiar with a bug style key, this is the Vibraplex key here on my shirt. And we decided that we were going to have a bug roundup event. And this would be a great way to get people on the air who maybe they owned a bug and they're now using an iambic key. We wanted to jolt them out of their chairs and say, you know what, grab that old bug and dust off the contacts and let's get on the air. We don't require any old radios or tube style radios. You could use anything that you want to transmit on as long as you're using a bug style key. And of course, if you don't have a bug and you still want to operate in the bug roundup, well, we don't stop anybody from doing what they want to do. We encourage everybody to get on the air. So each May and November, we have the Bug Roundup. And of course, we just had the Bug Roundup event that happened this last weekend. So many people were on the air. On our webpage, we have a registration page where you can sign up for the Bug Roundup event. This doesn't mean that you're going to score points or you're going to have to turn logs in. It's nothing like that. This is not a contest, it's an event. So on the registration page, we were able to get people to sign up with the premise that they will just be reminded about the Bug Roundup when it comes around every May and November. So if you're interested to sign up, that's great. You'll get an email about 1 month to 2 weeks before the event. Sometimes I'll put out 2 emails, one save the date, and then 2 weeks before or a week before, just to remind you that it's coming up. These are some of the pictures that were sent in to us by people in the last Bug Roundup. The upper right-hand key on your screen in the blue box, that key is actually a homebrew key, as well as the green one below it. So both of those keys were used in the Bug Roundup, and you can see in the background picture there, we've got an operator who just loves Vibroplex keys, and his Vibroplex keys, that's probably just 2 shelves out of 10 he has. It's an amazing collector for that. Me personally, I have an interesting thing about bugs. I don't want to collect the same bug over and over and over. So I will only purchase 1 bug of that style. Now, in some cases, the style changes throughout the years. So if there's a big difference between, say, an original in 1905 and an original in 1920, where they changed the shape of the bug, I may consider collecting those 2 bug styles. But I will not buy a 1950, 55, 56, 57 of an original bug. It just doesn't make sense to me. A bug is a bug is a bug, so I have the same thing. Now, granted, this person here, he enjoys collecting every single year of every single style, and that's perfectly fine. But for me, I like to keep my bugs unique. So unless there's some difference between one bug to the other, I prefer to just keep moving until I find something else interesting. When I first started my collection, it was all American. I didn't want to purchase anything other than American. Once I felt like I reached all of the American keys that I was really interested in, except for one. I still have 1 American bug that I'm interested in, but I'm not quite willing to pay what they're asking for it now. Then I started collecting other bugs from around the country, and I wouldn't really call it collecting, because as you can see on the station behind me here, this table is filled with bugs. They're all wired in parallel with each other, so I can go from one bug to the other at any given time. I don't have to wire them in. At one point, I thought as an audio guy, I would build a patch bay for it so I could just plug keys in. But being an audio guy, I'm lazy, and I never got around to building the patch bay. Although I have the patch bay, I just never wired it. So I use little jumpers, and I'll jump from one key to the other when I want to bring one out of the closet, or one from another room that I might have stored away, and I'll set it on the table and I'll just put some jumpers across. So for the Bug Roundup, I usually have 1 key for every conversation, and it makes for a good Bug Roundup because each person that I speak to will hear what bug, and that's the exchange for the Bug Roundup event. You want to just have a casual conversation, but you want to begin your conversation with the bug that you're using, the year that it was made, and maybe any interesting stories about it. So on our sign up page, again, it's volunteer. Not everybody is going to sign up for it. We have hundreds of people who are in the Bug Roundup event. I'll see logs coming in, and I'll see call letters, and I'll check them against the sign up sheet, and I'll never find those call letters on there. So there are people all around the world who are operating in this event who have never registered. On our last event, you can see here, these are the representation of each of the countries that signed up for our Bug Roundup event just this last weekend. Now, this registration went on for about a month and a half when I first announced it in some of the BBS or Groups.io where I tell people who are interested in Morse code that we're going to have the event. So those who didn't sign up, they get their reminders through the groups IO that I randomly choose based on who I believe would be interested in Morse code. You can see, obviously, the United States is our first and most users for registration. But you'll notice here there are 45 independent countries across the globe. As a matter of fact, if you look at the map to the left, you'll see that we have registered for this event people in all continents except for Antarctica. I have still yet to get an AN station sign up for the Bug Roundup event, but if any of you are going to the Antarctic and you want to bring your bug with you, there is a radio station in McMurdo, and I would love it if you signed up for the Bug Roundup or registered for the Bug Roundup so that we can actually say we've hit all 7 continents. But in any case, there's some really interesting ones on this list. Nepal. That would be considered rare DX. Let's see, what else we have? Latvia. Don't hear Latvia too much. We do hear Russian Federation a lot, but Latvia is an interesting one. Senegal, that's another really interesting one. Romania, for us in the United States, would be considered a very difficult DX to get. Greece, that's another one. On this side of the ocean, it's certainly not easy to get. And being in California, it's even farther. So unless you're on the East Coast, you probably haven't even talked to Greece before. Otherwise, you know, they're pretty much the standards you've all seen and worked before, and we appreciate every single person who signs up and operates in our Bug Roundup. As I mentioned, we do get logs that come in from around the world. In this case here, I just took 3 random logs. The first one from EA6BF, he's in Spain, and you can see that on May 22nd, he operated those 3 stations, which are, looks like Canada, Eastern Canada, Japan, and France. And then, of course, on the 23rd, which is Sunday, he operated all over Europe, including 3 in the United States. There we see K5KV, who I just happened to randomly select to the next picture. And he also operated W1GF. One thing you'll notice is he doesn't have any stations from the West Coast. We were unfortunate not to be able to hear Europe in this event, but as the solar cycle increases, hopefully we'll be able to get more European stations. Certainly we get Japan and South Pacific. That's pretty normal for us. As you see with K5KV, he's very central in the United States. He's out of Texas, so he reached the entire United States from the west to east coast, all the way across to Europe and down into South America. So Benny has some really great contacts there, and kudos to him for that. And he's operating with a modest station. He doesn't have a 200-foot tower with a 10-element Yagi. He has a modest station. PA5XM, he just emailed this morning. I just added that as it came in. And you can see here that keys, he operated all over Europe. Let's see if he's got K5. He does not have K5KV on his list, but he does have a W1AAX, who I don't believe is registered in our event. And he has W1GF, Greg, who is. So operations are happening, as you can see, from both the EA6 and the PA5 station. These contacts are being made all across Europe on an event that's being hosted by a United States California club. So we are internationally affecting the radio waves for Morse code and bug operations. So I'm really happy that we're getting this kind of activity. And still, every time I submit to the ARRL to post our invitation to our event under, well, I try not to do it under contest because it's not really a contest. There are no awards, no points, and we're allowed to use the WARC bands. So 30 meters, 17 meters, those are not off the table. By all means, I know that 30 and 17 are some of my best DX bands. So have at it. That's what I say. Have at it. We do offer different calling frequencies where you can go. One of the best ways while you're operating on the air is to get on the online spotting and chat window. You'll find that inside of the Bug Roundup page. It'll say spotting aid. Click on that. It'll open this window here. And as you can see, I just took a quick snapshot while I was putting these slides together. And at that moment, we had a IU0 station, and we had a IK5 station. a G4 station, and of course the SFM-ARC, that is our control operator. One of the great things about being a member of the W6SFM, if you're in the United States, I'd love to change it, but I've got to talk to the FCC about it, and possibly your version of the FCC. But one of the great features and privileges of being a W6SFM member is during the bug roundup, you can actually use the call W6SFM/your state. And there will only be one W6SFM station on the air at a time. So that station is the control operator for W6SFM. We have a sign-up sheet, and we offer 2-hour slots of operations for the entire 48 hours. So if you're on the East Coast, of course, signing up for a 2 to 3 a.m. shift is not very hard, because it's already 5 a.m. in the morning for you. And some people easily get up at 5 in the morning, and that would be perfect for them and excellent for me, because I don't like to be up before 9 o'clock in the morning if I can help it. But this is a great spotting tool. So those of you who want to just get on here because you're looking for a contact, because maybe you're calling CQ and nobody's answering you, you might find that you can jostle somebody from the United States onto the frequency that you're looking for, and they'll answer your CQ for you. So do enjoy the bug roundup. Again, it's just to promote Morse code and the use of bug style keys. We really want to keep those on the air. There's a lot of iambic keys out there, and there's nothing wrong with them, but there's nothing like operating with skill on a bug. So speaking of bugs, I just put a list together of some interesting bugs maybe I thought you have never seen before, or maybe you saw some of them and you never got a good close-up look of them. This one here is my very first bug. There's nothing really special about it at all, other than it's just near and dear to me. I bought this bug when I was, I believe, 13 years old. I went to our local ham radio outlet store, and I bought it. I think it was $200 and something. I had saved up all summer long to buy it. And I tell you, it's a beautiful bug, and it operates excellent to this day. So that's a standard original, well, not standard, but a original deluxe. And it's only called deluxe because it's chromed. If you didn't have the chrome, then it would be the standard. And the deluxe is also because it has a jeweled movement. And the jeweled movement, although you see this little red jewel on the top of the key, that has nothing to do with the jeweled movement. The jewel is actually inside the pinion that allows the arm, the pendulum arm, to swing back and forth. It's just there to lubricate things up, so to speak. The next one on our list here is a very, very rare and interesting bug. I will admit this is a replica, because the 1904 WO Coffee or Mechograph company, that was started in 1903, and the first bug ever to be produced was the 1904 WO Coffee bug. So this is what the very first bug actually looked like. You can see from the pictures, there's a giant metal ball there on the left-hand side of that first picture. The way this key operated, and all of the Mechograph keys for the first few years, they were spring steel under tension. So what would happen is, just like a pendulum on a grandfather clock, you move that steel ball up and down on the pendulum arm, or rather on the speed arm, and if you're down low, it swings slow. If you're up high, it swings faster. So again, just like a grandfather clock. And what they do is they captively hold the arm away from the contact with that weight arm, and then when you push down on the key in order to form the dits, it removes the strain from or the pressure from that pendulum arm that's horizontal, and it causes it to go into oscillation. So this was the concept behind the first bug. It was just spring under tension, and then released spring from tension, and there you go. So that's the 1904. There are 10 known of these in the world, and again, this unfortunately is a copy made by, I believe, Phil Boyles, who is in the UK there. So and I will thank G3YUH. He gave me, or didn't give it to me, but he let me get this key upon my request, and I'm very thankful for that. All right, next up is another Mechograph. And again, like I said, I don't collect the same thing. If it doesn't look or operate the same way, I'll probably buy it. The 1905 mechograph, exactly the same thing. You see, in this case, it's now horizontal and it's in a unit that will be operated on a desktop for small space. This way, the telegraph operator could have his entire desk be very shallow and still able to operate a bug without taking up the whole desk. Again, it's the same thing. You can see on the left-hand side that you have a series of weights that are connected to a steel spring, and then on the front side of those front side of those weights, when you push down on the left side of the bug, it releases that little arm that's holding the tension onto the weights, and they begin to oscillate. Same concept. Excellent bug. I actually got this one on the air this weekend, and I cheated. I made about 2 or 3 contacts with it because it just felt so great. The next one is a 1906 version of the same mechograph. As you can see, all they did was change the style of the key. It operates exactly the same way, but they've added this little triangle in the back there, and they added a scale so that you can always tune to the same speed consistently, because you slide that triangle to the left and the right, and that's what determines how fast the steel spring movement is. And they're just keeping it under tension at different lengths by doing that. So as you slide that, you're pinching that steel spring at different areas. The 1912 Vibraplex double lever. The double lever key is an amazing key. Extremely hard to use at first. The concept on this key is you have 2 independent levers. One side you push the left, it goes dit-dit-dit-dit-dit. The other side you push and it hits a contact on the right-hand side. So if you look at the middle picture, you'll notice that there's a contact on the right-hand side. Most modern bugs, you have the DAW contact on the left-hand side along with the DIT contact on the left-hand side. In this case, these are independent arms, so the DIT contact is on the left side. It's that little bent steel spring in the middle of the bug on the bottom when we're looking at that center picture, and you have the DAW contact that's on the right. The way I operate this bug, I don't know that anybody else does it, but I kind of operate it like a iambic key. If you squeeze both paddles at the same time, clearly, because it's just a single DAW that comes out when you make contact, if you hold the 2 paddles together, it shorts out any dits that are being made, and it just sends a DAW. So what I found is, if I want to send a letter that has dits in between DAWs, like for example, an X, da, 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 what I'll do is I'll squeeze both at the same time, and then I'll release the DAW side while continuing to hold the dit side, and those dits will show up, and then I'll push back down on the DAW. So it's da, 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 like that. It's an interesting concept. It's kind of iambic in a crazy way, but it really works for me. And the biggest part about it, like I said, is when you are sending on this bug, as bug operators, we tend to keep our thumb, or if you're right-handed, you keep your index finger on that DAW side and you just kind of rotate back and forth. The problem with that is, with this bug, if you keep your finger on that right-hand side, right-hand side, DAW side, then what happens is you keep shorting out the dits. So it's extremely difficult to send. You have to really remember to remove your hand or send very oddly back and forth like this. So that's the 1912. Here's the 1913 mechograph. As you can see, they went away from that right angle key. They went into a standard bug. This is a vast improvement over some of the older style mechographs, but this Premier is the last mechograph key that the gentleman made. And again, this is an American key. It had an interesting contact. You'll see it in the left-hand picture on the bottom left side. That steel spring is way extended, and that's the contact that is hit for the dits. So the concept behind all bugs are, you have the pendulum arm, you have a stop screw, and then as you push the dit side, it hits the stop screw, and that forces the pendulum arm into oscillation. And that's where your dits are made. The DAW contact is simply just a closure to closure, or a contact to contact closure. But the dits are dependent on the weight on the bug. Again, the farther out on the bug you have it, the slower the bug will go because it has more weight on it. The farther in you bring the weight to you, the quicker the oscillation will be when it hits the stop screw. So again, this was the last mechograph made. Here's a 1914 Vibraplex Premier. I can only wish this was another real key. This is a key that was made by G3YUH. This key, there's only one known in existence, and I've only seen a picture of it, and I really liked the way the key functioned. You'll see that it has a screw towards the square pinion box there, and it has a little leaf spring on it. And the way this works is there's no spring that controls tension on this bug. It's just that little leaf spring. So as tight or loose as that leaf spring happens to be, that's what your tension is set at. Otherwise, it pretty much works the same as all the other bugs. But this bug here, the most interesting thing about it is you notice it says Vibraplex Premier, but it looks very similar to that mechograph that we were just looking at. Well, the reason for that is because late 1913, early 1914, the owner of the mechograph company passed away. And when he did, his wife sold all of the parts that were left over from the mechograph company to the Vibraplex company. And Vibraplex decided, why waste parts? So they went ahead and made a hybrid key out of mechograph parts. And between 1914 and about 1920, you're going to find some Vibraplex that will have different parts on them that don't look familiar to Vibraplex. And that's because they were just continually using the leftover mechograph parts that they acquired when they bought out the mechograph company from the wife of the owner of mechograph. So again, this is a replica key. It's fashioned with the base that looks just like the one key that we know in existence, has that cobalt blue base, and it has those hybrid parts. The next one up is another 1914 key. This particular 1914 key started a trend. This is really called a number 4, but because it had a cobalt blue base as well, or at least the original first series 1914s, it's difficult to see in this picture here, but that base is actually an original 1914 blue base. And it was called the Blue Racer because it was generally much faster than all of the other Morse keys that were being put out at the time. The standard keys, the originals, they were fast keys, but the Blue Racer was a little shorter stature key compared to the standard original, and because of that, the steel spring had to be shorter. And when you shorten the steel spring, what ends up happening is it has more tension, so the pendulum arm will swing much faster. So the Blue Racer was generally much faster than the original key, and because it had the blue base, they adopted the name the Blue Racer. It was not named the Blue Racer by the Vibraplex company, but now they call it the Blue Racer, and Vibraplex is still around. It's changed hands about 3 or 4 times. The current owner, Scott, I'm very thankful that he took the company over, and he continues to produce these keys. So this is the Blue Racer key, an original 1914. Now here's a real oddball, if you want to compare oddballs. This key, 1914, Boutier, this is a prototype key. This key never existed. It was never made. But what happened was we went through some patents, and G3YUH again grabbed those patents, and he built a key based on the patent drawings for this key. And I was so excited when Ron decided he would make this key. I went ahead and purchased it from him when he was completed with it. So this key, again, never made, never produced that we know of, but the patent drawings were there in the patent office, so we went ahead and had him build it out. It's a really complicated key. There are some tiny, very sensitive springs, and the adjustments on this bug are very, very difficult. I do operate it. It's not the best bug in the world, but if you ask Ron, he would tell you that the bug is meant to be a display, but there is no such thing as a display key in my collection. Anything I own has got to be able to get on the air. And certainly enough, this bug here has been on the air many a times. 1917, we moved to Model X. This was an interesting bug. The Vibraplex company came out with 2 versions of the Model X. I guess this first one, maybe it was a failure at the time, but the 1917 Model X used square weights instead of round weights, and it had a single contact. So the same contact that made the DAWs was also the same contact that made the DITs. It would be nearly impossible to explain it to you, but if you look in the center of the key on the right-hand picture, you'll see that's where the contact is. You'll notice there's a big square bar when you push on the right-hand side of the bug to form the DITs. That arm, the pendulum hits that little contact that sits, or rather hits a little steel spring between the contact and that big square bar above it. So it's literally driving that contact into the other contact. As opposed to when you go on the left-hand side of the bug, what happens is you take that square bar arm and you just crush it right in, that whole spring steel right into the contact. So it works the same exact way. So it's a single contact bug. The Model 2 of this, they changed some of the springs and they put round weights on that they were using on the standard bugs at the time, as opposed to these square weights that were only used on one other model. That's the one bug that I'm interested in. So if you have a Model X version 2 that you want to donate to me, I'm more than happy to accept it. It will complete my American collection. Next up is the 1920 Bunnell Gold Bug. A lot of you will probably be familiar with Bunnell. Bunnell made in the war effort for World War II the flameproof, the Navy flameproof key. It was an excellent pump style key, probably the first pump style key in the United States, or at least that I know of, that was commercially used. The Navy got a hold of it, and the patents were shared among 3 different companies. Everybody made it. They all had the same designation number on them. There are no serial numbers for them for the Navy flameproof key, but there are 3 versions and they have designations. This was J.H. Bunnell's Gold Bug, and the Gold Bug, again, is also a single contact bug. Again, you notice there's no right-hand side contact or left-hand side contact for the DAW. What happens is when you push the right-hand side of the bug, then you get your DAWs by literally bending the arm. It just puts so much pressure on the arm, it bends it into the DAW, into that contact. And then again, same theory as the last bug. When you push the DIT side on the left, then it just goes into oscillation because it hits a stop spring or a stop contact. And that stop is the one that acts both as tension and the stop screw, and that's on the bottom side, the left-hand picture, bottom far right. So it's both a stop and a spring at the same time. So then you can adjust the tension and the stop individually depending on where you put that screw. All right, this is another interesting one. I don't think it was very popular, actually. This is a 1920 Vibraplex. This is when they decided to go into, instead of a right angle key, they went with a vertical key. So their concept for the vertical key was a telegraph operator could be sitting at the table, or a postal worker actually is a very good case for this, where they have a lot of things on their desk like sorting boxes and such, so they would be taking up as little operations as possible. If you lay this key down flat, it's pretty much essentially a standard bug that just sits upright, and they've rotated the paddle so it faces out. So other than that, it's not too much different than the other bug styles that you've seen so far, just in a vertical. I will say that it's not the greatest bug to send on, because the distance between the paddle and the pinion area where the rotation happens, the distance is so small that you really got to hit it very firmly in order to get that rotation moving. So if you hit lightly, it just barely moves. The same thing, they've made corrections to it in this 1921 version of the Wire Chief, and the corrections made on this bug here helped tremendously. They added a little bit more space in the lower arm, and they changed the pivot point and the way it operates. So again, it's nothing more than a standard bug upright, but because of the changes they made, it made sending on this bug a lot more operational. Here's another really interesting one. I've only seen one or two of these in person, other than the one that I have here pictured. And this was a 1920 bug made by National. I do not believe that it was made by the National Radio Company, who made HF radios. This is just a company that called themselves National. It was vertical. If you know differently, please let me know. If any of you are familiar with the Australian key, the pendograph key and this key work very similar. The weight is in the center of the key. As you push down, that pendulum swings itself left and right based on how high or low you set it. So it's another compact vertical bug. Now, the interesting thing about the 1920, they made a 1920, 21, and 22. The 1921, again, they changed the style. As you noticed on the last one, it may not have, the paddles are actually off-centered to the left side, and now they've put these two paddles into the center. They changed the weight and the shape of the weight in the middle there. It's that round cylindrical thing. And with this one, instead of loosening a screw in the back and lifting the weight up and down, it's literally a screw. You just turn the weight and it rises or falls on the arm that you have it on. Now, the very interesting thing about this bug is I mentioned that there was a 1920, 21, and 22. Well, if you look up the patent drawings, you'll find that the 1920, 21, and 22 bugs all share the same patent number. The National Bug Company never changed the patent. They never applied for a new patent. So I guess anybody who wants to steal this bug for modern day, I suppose it's yours, because there is no existence of a patent for the other two models after the first was created. So I've never seen that before, where they didn't submit a patent, especially when it's something they could be selling to many radio operators. So that's the National. I do not have the 1922. Somebody snatched it out from under me, and I was quite disappointed, but we move on. All right, the 1940 McElroy, the 600 Deluxe is an interesting key. It's got very large contacts on it. That's what sets it apart from a lot of other bugs. The contact size are just huge. This bug, it looks like it got left in somebody's garage, and they came in and splattered paint all over the key. Well, in fact, they didn't splatter paint all over the key. McElroy did that for you. That's what they're calling the Deluxe, because of that splattered paint pattern. Some people might call it a tiger pattern. I don't. I call it splattered paint. It was a very good bug. It worked super well. McElroy had been making keys for a long time before this, into the early 30s, and they all look very similar, but I thought this was unique because of the paint splattering on it and the enormous size of the contacts. And I suspect that the contacts were large because at the time, amateur radios were using high voltage, and so were, I guess, all of the commercial radios were using high voltage tubes that were sending cathode voltages off to the key, so that when you would push down on the contact, that high voltage, some cases 400 to 800 volts, would be passing through the contact back to the radio to send the signal. So I'm just assuming that he made those contacts big so that you could have higher voltages going through them, although none of the other bugs before them seem to have these enormous contacts. McElroy is known for being the world champion at receiving in Morse code. I believe he won an event where he copied approximately 100 words per minute. So when you're copying at those speeds, you're not copying Morse code, you're copying by sound and sound of words. So a perfect example would be the word best. Best is da, did it, dit, did it, da. So when you send best fast, you hear a da, did it, da. So you hear that rhythm in it, da, did it, da. When you do that and you speed it up to 100 words per minute, it just has a cadence that becomes a word. So people who are copying at speeds, say above 45, I'm good to about 41, 42. But I find that anything above 41, 42, you've got to be listening to cadence, and you're not listening to individual characters anymore. So it's akin to what I consider, if you remember back in the 70s, the Evelyn Wood speed reading courses, where you would move your finger across the book on the pages. And what the concept was is you were absorbing entire words at a time. And then later on, you would move your finger down through the center of the book and you were absorbing entire sentences, or at least those center words of the sentences, all at one time. It's the same concept. Instead of hearing characters, you're hearing cadences that become words. So it's speed code with the Evelyn Wood speed code, I guess. Moving on, 1950 Cedar Rapids bug. There's nothing really special about this bug at all, other than it's just a huge piece of cast iron. It is the heaviest key you'll find for an American key, and it has amazing operation, smooth as can be, and it was made in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, so we call it the Cedar Rapids bug. It's, I believe, the what is it? I can't remember. I'm going blank, but I think it was International Electric Company, something like that. I feel ashamed. I don't know, but we always call it the Cedar Rapids bug because of where it was made. But that particular bug, it's just a heavy, solid key. All right, 1950 Les Logan SpeedX 501T. The interesting thing about this bug is, although it looks just like a regular bug, there really isn't anything special about its operation as a bug. But you'll notice in the top of this bug, in both the left and the center picture, there's that arm that looks like a T. That's the reason it's called the 501T, I imagine. And the reason for this T is not only so that the operator could take it after his shift was over and pick it up by the handle, but also if you wanted, you could lean it on its right-hand side, as you see in that final picture, the third to the right, and it could be used as a straight Morse code key. So once you set it on its side, the spring tension keeps it falling on itself, and it can no longer send dits because you would have to be fighting gravity in the upward direction. So now you have the ability to just push down on it like a standard Morse code key. So the 501T was made in, I think, 1947 to 1950. Logan sold to another company later on, but Les Logan actually made these bugs out of the basement of his house in San Francisco, California. So that's another interesting fact about Les Logan. Later on, when he sold the company, it didn't actually survive because the keys were not really being made the way Les Logan had made them. 1950, this is another great key. This is the Dow rotatable key. So again, it's very similar in its operation to all other keys, but you'll notice in the center picture, and especially on the right-hand picture, you see that the paddles are slightly on a tilt. Well, on that center picture and the far right picture, you notice that there's a big screw in the top of that round area in front of, right in front of the paddle. That screw allows you to loosen it and then literally rotate that paddle all the way to the left or all the way to the right. You can literally move that. And you notice that there's that little piece of plastic in the, say, look at the middle picture on the bottom center. There's that little reddish looking plastic there. What that is that's a isolation so that the dit contact can actually travel with the entire arm. So as you move those paddles, simultaneously there's a rod that is connected to it that rotates with it, with the contact. So it always maintains the contact directly in line as the paddle rotates. Why would you want to rotate the paddle, you might ask? Well, one good reason that I can think of is because you're on a ship. And if you're on a ship and you're pitching back and forth, then every time the ship lists over to the left-hand side, that paddle wants to start sending dits or short itself out. So to counteract that, if you rotate the paddle slightly to the left as you're listing back and forth, I guess is what it is, then it only becomes straight up vertically. It never falls on itself to send those dits. So that's one reason. Another reason for it is because you are on a train and you're operating as a postal worker on the train. In those days, in order to keep the postal mail on the train, the boxes were all at an angle. So they would put the mail in, and this way, as the train was bouncing around, the mail wasn't falling out. It was at an angle lying on itself. So the same concept, when you put a bug inside one of those cubby holes where the mail goes, then you need to be able to bend the lever back over straight so that you can operate it. So there's two cases where I can see using a rotatable bug, and that would be in the first case where you're using it on the ship, and the second case where you're using it in a postal mail train. There's another company that made what was called a bent lever key. As a matter of fact, it might have been Dow, now that I think about it, but it was actually not rotatable, but it was a fixed arm, and the arm was actually bent over. It looked like somebody left it out in the sun, and it just melted over. So they must have heated that brass up real hot and then pushed it over. So it was constantly in a bend mode. So if you used it on a flat table, you'd have to hold your arm sideways in order to use it. So it was definitely made for the train postal carriers. The 2010 bugs, everything changed. So in 2010, GHD, which is a Japanese company, they were making bugs, and they came up with the concept to have electronic contacts. So as you see in the far right-hand picture, there's a black box on the top and there's a black box on the bottom. What this is where there would be metal contacts that make contact with each other. What they've done is they put a photocoupler here, and then they've put a black piece of metal on the arm, and when you're sending, that pendulum arm is inserting the black piece inside of the photocoupler and interrupting the circuit. And underneath this key, there's a little circuit board that translates that voltage block on the photo isolator into a pulse, and the pulse is sent to the radio as a contact. So this was the first that I know of electronic contact key, operates as a regular bug. One of the interesting things about this bug, other than the fascinating electronic contacts, is with this particular bug, you notice there are two paddles and they're very close to each other. Normally you wouldn't have the paddles quite so close, but with this bug, you can operate it as a single lever, meaning you push this way and it DAWs, and it's made in contact on this side here. And when you push this way, you get your DITs, and it's made in contact here. As you remember, I showed you the double lever key. So with the double lever key, you remember you had a separate contact here, and independent levers. Well, with this GHD model, they give you a little piece of metal block that you can insert in between, and it holds those paddles together and it locks them so that it can only rotate to one side or the other. So you can't short out your DITs when you're sending DAWs. It's one or the other. But if you remove that metal block in between, you can now independently operate this bug as a dual lever. So this is one of the very few keys that I know of where you can actually set it up as a single or a dual lever. And it wasn't sold as an option. It was actually given to you so that you can make that change depending on how you wanted to operate this bug. To keep the complication down, I just kept it as a single lever bug, and I tied the two arms together. I don't know that everybody does that, but I don't hear too many of these on the radio. I do hear a lot of GHD keys, but they tend to be very expensive now. For example, a standard straight key I've been seeing selling in the 500-pound area. So not very cheap for a standard straight key. Not a bug, just a regular push-down type of key, like a Kent key. The other thing about these GHD keys is they are mirror polished. So you could literally use the top of that key as a mirror. All of the GHD keys have that mirror polish. And then finally, this is another 2010 designed by an Italian, the Bagali company. And the Bagali Intrepid is one of the first, not the only, but one of the first magnetic bugs. On this key here, there are contacts, of course, but you'll notice when you look down inside on that right-hand picture, there's a bunch of magnets. Those little round circles are all magnets. There is, on the left-hand side of that right-hand picture, there's that little pointy-looking piece. That's actually a contact for the DITs, and it's placed on a spring, so that contact can debounce itself by moving back and forth like this as the pendulum arm hits it. One of the interesting things, other than the fact that it's a magnetic bug and sends like a key or paddle, it's amazingly clean. One of the other interesting things about it is because of the design, the pendulum actually starts in the rear from that box where the eagle is inscribed on. So as you move the weights towards you, as they are now in the picture, towards the paddle, you actually slow the bug down because it's at the far end. So this is completely reversed from a regular bug where the weights move closer to the end of the paddle and operate slowly when they're farther away from you. So in this case, they're closer to you and you speed up as you move them away from you. So that's a really interesting concept on this bug. And Bugali makes a whole host of keys. You can find those online. Just search Bugali keys, and you can see he makes different bugs, different straight keys, different iambic paddles. The iambic paddles are amazing. So there's a look at a bunch of different keys that you can consider owning yourself. And again, as you saw, I tried not to show you the same thing over and over. My collections are very oddball keys, and I do have bugs, and I do have straight keys, and I do have, I think I own like 2 iambic paddles. So as you can tell, I'm not much of an iambic sender, although I can use it. And I do, once I go over 30 words a minute, I will go to the iambic paddle because it's much easier. Another thing that I do is I have a program called the Halfway House for Keys program. If you go to the SKCC website, which is the Straight Key Century Club, this is an organization that supports straight key operations on the air. They have contests and events all the time. It's for people who are just starting out with straight keys and people who have been around for years. If you go to their homepage, you'll see more information on the Halfway House for Keys program. Basically what it is it's where I collect donations of straight keys and bugs and parts. And when I say parts, I can use all kinds of parts. And we fix and build keys out of the parts, and we take those keys and we donate them to somebody who is under 30 and not supported or have enough funds in order to fund their hobby of amateur radio. There are some requirements, and we are a little tight because we get a lot of requests from people saying, oh, I'd like to get this key from you, or I'd like to have that key from you, or can you give me this, can you give me that? And then you'll find out that they just have a key collection and they're looking for a key that we have that they don't. So from time to time, I'll give away some parts to those people because they want to complete their key, and we're all for that too. But the real concept behind the program is that we are getting youngsters, and when I say youngsters, 30 and under, but there generally are people who are 14 to 18 who contact us, and they need a key, and they need to be able to get on the air, and their parents don't support it. I had one person, he was 16 years old, he emailed me, he told me he loved World War II stuff, and he was really interested in ham radio, but his parents told him they weren't going to support him at all because they didn't believe he would stick with the hobby. They outright told him, we don't think you're going to stick with this, so we're not going to spend any money on it. So he filled out his application, his parents signed on the application saying, whatever, go ahead, do what you want to do. And I went ahead and I sent him an HF radio. I sent him an 80-meter dipole that he could tune across all the bands. It was a doublet. I sent him a World War II J38 model straight key and some wire to hook up his antenna with. And he used that for about a year. And after about a year, he contacted me back and he said, you know, I'm very thankful for you. I'm going to return your radio to you. I'm going to keep the key and I'm going to keep the antenna, but I'm upgrading to a brand new radio and I'm really in love with this hobby. And thank you for allowing me to get started. So by this time he was 17, he had a summer job and he was able to pay for a radio on his own. But there's a case where our Halfway House for Keys program was able to get somebody young on the air when they otherwise just wouldn't even be able to. Now, I don't promise everybody I'll give them a radio and an antenna, but they'll definitely get a key out of the program if they need it. So if you know anybody who's desperate, doesn't have any support, of course they know you. So I would hope that you would be an Elmer for them and you would help them out any way you can. But if you just don't have a key and you need to find one, just contact me and we'll see what we can do there. All right. So with that, I will leave it open for any questions and answers that you're looking to ask. Careful. I know enough about everything to talk forever. So if you ever want to leave this meeting, then you should be very careful not to ask anything where I can go astray. And I believe Dave knows that already.
No, not at all. It was fascinating when we talked, but I must admit it was an hour and a half rehearsal, which was the longest technical rehearsal we've ever done. But it was fascinating.
Oh, so sorry.
I mean, it was not at all. And you know that if we divert into something that both of us are interested in, television and professional television and everything else, then we'd be here for another couple of hours. But anyway,
I'm sorry to the 3 viewers that are left.
No, not at all. We have about 60 people still watching this, and of course, as I told you, probably several hundred people will have watched it within the next week. So it's a great talk. Thank you, and I know it's a fascinating close-up on those bugs. This is an invitation now for anybody at home who's watching on BATC or Facebook. If you want a question, or if you've got a comment, or even post a picture, we might be able to get that to Mike. Then now is the time to ask that question and send that comment. Before we move to those, and a couple of people have sent us pictures of keys, Mike, I'd just like to ask you a question myself. I thought was really interesting is you were going through the history of your American keys, but between 1950 and 2010, you had no keys. Between the Dow, I think it was, and the GHD. So can I assume from that there wasn't much of a development in different types of keys in those 60 years?
No, as a matter of fact, what you're going to find is all the keys pretty much looked and operated. If you give me just 1 second here, I'll give you a quick example. Let me just grab 2 keys. So I do have 1950s, 40s, 60s keys, but it'll be difficult to see. But for example, here's that blue racer key that I talked about. And, pretty standard, straightforward key as you saw in the picture. But if you look here, this is a 1950 blue racer. Of course, it's no longer blue because this was the deluxe version of it. And as you notice, there's not a whole lot of change between the 1914 and the 1950 model, except for the fact that instead of having this square pendulum area here, they just simply rounded it out. And then the other thing is on the rear, the damper that stops the lever from moving the pendulum, they've changed it into a different style damper. And the damper is what differentiates many of the years from each other because they had 3 different unique styles of dampers. But really, there's just not a lot of difference other than they went to the jeweled movement and they chromed it. And then, of course, the square pinion area and the blue base. But that's the reason I didn't show anything from the 40s forward to 2010, because as you mentioned, there's just not a lot of advancements that were made in the keys between those years, other than just fancy embellishments that they put on the keys. Nobody really thought to redesign the key until the magnetic bugs really started coming around. And that's when you see that the electronic contacts and the magnetic key was shown. And it's because of just that simple fact. The changes are very small. And again, I will not continue to purchase different years just because they're different years, because really they all look and operate the same. So that's a personal preference on my side.
That's brilliant. Thank you. As I said to everybody at home now, we've got a few comments for you, and I'll come to those in a moment. But first, so this is the time to enter your questions or comments now. Before we do that, though, I'd like to share with you some of the pictures that have been sent by 3 people during the week. This is not a bug, but this is from Paul G3VPT. And he says, this is my World War II buzzer training buzzer. It's part of their WW2 radio display that we have at the 1940s weekend on the North Norfolk Railway. For you, Mike, the North Norfolk Railway is a heritage line. It's one of the old steam type railways, and once a year they have a 1940s weekend. He says that a few years ago, 2 elderly gentlemen came over and one said, "Oh, a training buzzer. Does it still work?" He said yes, And so then he said, you can try it if you like. And then he was sending perfect Morse very quickly. And when asked, he told me that he was a radio operator in the Lancaster Bombers. And he said that Paul said that really made their weekend. So look at that. Isn't that a fantastic bit of technology? You can just see the bottom left, I guess, is the buzzer. And then the right hand side.
Yeah, it actually looks like a solenoid for a sounder as opposed to a buzzer. A buzzer being a piezoelectric or some sort of circuit that would create a buzzing sound. Although I can't really see the picture in full screen like others do, I can say that it looks similar to what I would see on what's called a sounder the telegraph company had. It's a series of solenoids that open and close, and they would go to a clicker, and the clicker is what the operator would hear. So again, with the telegraph, there was no tone. They heard nothing but click, 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 click. And this would be the solenoids.
Amazing, wasn't it? Yeah, I guess it's like maybe that solenoid, the buzzer there worked a bit like if you take a relay and you sort of feed one of the outputs. Sorry?
Yeah, is there a circle next to the solenoid? Is there on the upper part?
I don't know, but excuse me, my guess is that it works a bit like if you attach a relay and then you collect the normally closed contacts to the series with it, and then of course the relay closes, it switches off, you get a buzzing effect, and I'm guessing that's how that works.
It could be a little buzzer that's sitting next to the solenoid. I can't really see clearly, but yeah, that's a beautiful practice setup that I've seen there. All of the military keys, even the Russian keys, look very similar to that for their practice setup. It's interesting how they went from the practice keys that had that straight piece of metal to the different styles of J38s and the Kent keys that changed the whole style of Morse code straight keys.
Yeah. Well, we've got another picture now. Now this is from Chris, G3XVL, and he's also, by the way, bug user group member 211.
Yep.
And he said, looking forward to hearing the talk from you. I was on the air for the Bug Roundup event on Saturday with my Vibraflex Lightning key, but propagation wasn't doing any favours, and I didn't manage to hook up with other bug key users. But attached is a picture of my 1958 Lightning Chrome Deluxe.
Yeah, the Lightning was a very nice bug. As you see, that's one of the styles that had those square weights on it. And that developed into the Zephyr and the Champion, which were lesser expensive models. The Lightning was known as the king of the three models, and it's a beautiful bug. I have one of those myself. I believe I have a 1915 or 16, if I'm not mistaken, and then I have a 30s, 60s, and 80s version of it, and they all send differently, and that's because of the manufacturer. They made the keys slightly different using different metals and different contact materials. So yeah, that's a beautiful bug.
Yeah.
And incidentally, Benny K5KV is the head of the bug group, so he's referring to K5KV's bug group.
Oh, that's what he's a member number 211 of. Yeah.
I think I'm number 25. I don't recall.
Oh, wow. Okay. Great, thanks. And now one final set of pictures. This came from Mike G4DYC. He sent us some pictures.
Eddystone.
That's right. He says this is an Eddystone bug, shaped like bug, and including there's a picture of an interior. I think if we move along a little bit, Tammy, for everybody at home, and I'm sure Mike's seen one of these before, but you know, that's the insides. I mean, that looks relatively crude, really, doesn't it?
It's exactly the same as any standard original bug, but it's shaped into an egg shape with the cover on it. It's a novelty key, sends very well. I actually thought about buying one of those a few times, but every time I open it up, I look and say, it's a bug. It's the same as everything else. It just has a neat shape to it. So eventually, when I see one and it's cheap enough, I'm going to go ahead and get it. They tend to be a little more on the expensive side, but it's a beautiful bug. It's a definitely a nice Art Deco piece of equipment.
Fantastic that. Mike also sent a couple of pictures next of his Vibraflex bug, which is within a couple of years of 100 years old, he says.
Yeah, looks like a 25 probably.
Yeah. And there's the next
tell by the
picture
serial number. But yeah, based on the damper style in the back and that high-rise pinion area towards the paddles there, that shape was very prevalent from about 1920 to 1925.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm going to tell you, you're really stirring up all of the emotions and everything of our Morse. Okay, I mean, I think I explained to you when we had the rehearsal. You know, we really do have a lot of Morse aficionados and very keen Morse people here, including Roger G3LDI, for example, normally runs a boot camp every year to bring people in and teach them an intensive sort of weekend course. And indeed on the air, throughout the winter and the autumn and up to the spring, there's courses going on the air depending on what level you're at on the air, 2 or 3 times a week. And especially, of course, during these COVID times, we've been doing that even more. So we've got a lot of people who've enjoyed this talk. Lots of wonderful comments and thanks. I won't read them all out to you, but believe me, you know, lots of people thanking you. I've got a few specific questions. Roger G3LDI says, lots of very unusual keys, Mike. Where did you find them all? He says.
Well, I would say that you just keep your eyes peeled when you're moving about. Some of them are swap meet stuff. Some of them are things I found on eBay where they were mislabeled because the person didn't know what they were selling. They found it at a garage sale. Some of them come from a boutique center where they tried to overcharge, but you find when you tell them, I'll give you $25 for that, they go ahead and say, okay, 25 seems fair, and they don't realize they're giving away what would be a $500 bug. Don't want to take advantage of anybody, but you know, if they don't even know what they're selling, then I suppose they are asking the price and you're paying it. So you just have to be crafty about where you look and what you find. I try to be conservative with my spending, of course. I don't have the funds that I would like to have in order to purchase every key that I want. But if I find them at a good deal, I try to nab them. And then through the help of Ron G3YUH, like I said, he's created a few bugs for me so that I can enjoy things that I could never afford or aren't even available to be purchased.
Mm. Yeah. Malcolm G3PDH says, a very interesting and congratulations on a fine collection of bugs. Have you used straight a bug, but now the paddle and electronic keyer, but now going back to a bug because he forgets to send the dashes, is what he says. I think I've read that right.
Yeah, and you know what? That goes back to what I was talking about with my class. And when you send on an iambic paddle, you're really doing nothing more than timing. You're not really creating the fundamental code. And your brain doesn't hear the code as you're sending it. It just knows that you hold down for 1 millisecond on one side or the other to create a dit or a da. And then your finger and the memory muscle just knows how long to squeeze the two together in iambic mode in order to create the letter. So to me, that's not the same as learning the fundamentals and building that foundation that code is made from. For myself, I have a very odd thing that I'm able to do, and that is to switch to different sides of my brain, and I can actually turn off the bug and go straight to a paddle, and I have no issues with it. As a matter of fact, the other day during the bug roundup, I was talking to somebody on the air about that, and I was sending on the bug, of course, and I started talking about exactly what I just mentioned there. And my brain switched over to the other side and was thinking paddle because I was talking about paddle. And all of a sudden my Morse code was just not being sent properly on the bug anymore. I was skipping dashes and, you know, das and dits all over the place. And I had to put myself back in the place of mind where I was back on bug again. And of course it all came right back and I went smoothly into the conversation. But yeah, you have to be able to split the hemispheres of your brain in order to think in the mechanical portion and the electronic portion. They are different, completely different sending methods.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Roger G3RDI says, wonder if you have an Eddystone bug. I guess you've answered that.
Oh, I don't yet.
And it was the only bug he used in his early days, but then he says he built the OZ7BO or OZ7BO keyer. Do you know that one?
I haven't seen one. Yeah, I do. I haven't seen one for a while. I think somebody in the early years donated one to me, and it's sitting in a closet. I will most likely never use it, not because it's not an excellent project key, but because I just rarely send on an iambic or a paddle style key.
Okay. Finally, at the moment, anyway, Malcolm, G3PDH again, asks, Mike, I did purchase a bug whilst on a ship as a radio operator in New Zealand. It looks like a Vibraflex Chrome. Do you know of a New Zealand manufacturer, he says?
My thoughts are all going to Australia more than New Zealand. I'd have to look into it and make sure what I'm thinking of. But the keys that I know of that were made in the South Pacific there, a lot of them were right-hand style or vertical style bugs. There's one that's in my mind, but I can't remember what it is, but I can certainly find that out and get back to you on that.
All right, well, that would be nice if you do. Mike, I think we've exhausted the questions. It's been a wonderful talk and a wonderful journey on all the different Morse keys, and particularly all of the bugs and things, which someone like me, who I'm afraid to tell you is not a Morse operator, mainly though, not because I don't like it, I just don't get much time for any radio, but I'm sure one day I shall turn to it. And I hope this has also inspired many people to actually give Morse a go. As I said, we're very active in this county in England on Morse already, and there's plenty of opportunities to learn. But we're really grateful for you coming on tonight and sharing this collection and your love of Morse. And very good luck with the Samuel Morse Amateur Radio Club. And in particularly, I loved your Halfway House program Halfway House to Keys program, which is sounds a brilliant program. So, Mike, once again, thank you very much. I know this has been taking up time in your working day as well. We're really grateful tonight. Thank you very much to Mike, N6MQL. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Dave, Tammy. I really appreciate you having me on, and I hope this has inspired some of you guys to dust off those contacts on the bugs and join us for the next bug roundup in November.
Definitely will, and we'll make sure, if you send me a note as well, we'll make sure that we remind everybody here as well. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And you. Thank you very much. There we are. That's Mike. Thanks very much again to him for a wonderful presentation on Morse. We thought, hopefully, we've especially treated those in the club who normally have to give these sort of talks. I'm thinking of the Roger, Malcolm, and Jim and things like that. We wanted to give them something back tonight and celebrating Morse. So it's been a wonderful evening. Just to remind you what's happening next week on the club, we've got the GB Tourist News on Sunday at 7 o'clock. On Monday, the 31st of May, it's the Monday Night Net, all about artificial intelligence. That's 7:30 on GB3MB. 8:30 is the 80-metre CW Net. And on the 2nd of June, a week's time, here on NARC Live, we've got a talk about the de-expeditioning from Bob K4 UEE, and features a video all about the FT5ZM de-expedition to Amsterdam, Ireland. Plus all the regulars, and don't forget to let us have your stories. Been a good night, isn't it, Tammy?
It has. Yep, very good.
And don't forget to keep in touch with us. Please send us the details to the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. We look forward to hearing from you. But from now, until next week, from Tammy M0TC.
Goodbye.
And from me, David G7ERP, take care of yourselves. Good night. Bye-bye.